For this video, we're going to be taking what we've already learned about monetary policy and now starting to model it using something called the money market. So the money market is going to obviously somewhat simplistically be the market for demanding and supplying money. So to first figure out money demand, we have to realize the opportunity cost of holding on to money, holding on to currency, if you will. The opportunity cost of holding on to hundreds of thousands of dollars is the interest you could have earned had you put it in a bank or lent it out to somebody in some fashion. So uh, for this, you have to think of two different types of interest rates: short-term rates. And the idea here is the higher the short-term interest rate, the higher opportunity cost of holding on to that currency. Long-term interest rates, they're not really considered in the opportunity cost of holding money because you're just not thinking that far in advance when it comes to holding on to $100. You're thinking, what about right now? What can I earn? So we're looking at short-term interest rates, and the higher the interest rate, the more money you could have made had you lent it out through some financial intermediary. So this leads us to our money demand curve. If we have our nominal interest rate or short-term interest rate on the y-axis and the quantity of money on the x-axis, you are going to be less likely to hold on to money as the interest rate is higher. You're going to be more likely to hold on to money as the interest rate is lower. So that is why we have a downward sloping demand curve when it comes to money demand. So this is really just a way of illustrating that opportunity cost that we talked about on our last slide. Now, we do have to have a quick note on bond prices. The prices of previously issued bonds, so loans to companies and governments, is inversely related to the interest rates on currently issued bonds. So if the bond price goes up on currently issued bonds, that means to buy a previously issued bond, it would go down in price. And that's because relatively it's going to pay out a worse interest rate. So as the current interest rate rises, price of previously issued bonds decreases. The opposite is true as well. As the price of new bonds issued, as the interest rate on new bonds issued falls, that means that the price of previously issued bonds, which have become relatively better paying off, will actually increase. So that is our money demand. How does it shift? Well, if there's a change in price level, that's going to shift the money demand because you physically need more money in order to pay for things. So a increase in your price level and increase in inflation means that your money demand should increase. The opposite should be the same as well. And it should be proportional to the money price level. So if the price level rises by 20%, money demand should rise 20% because you would need 20% more money to buy the same amount of goods. A change in real GDP is also going to change your money demand. An increase will cause a rightward shift. The opposite will be true as well. Some of that has to do with price level, but it's not quite as correlated. You can more think of it in terms of more stuff has been output, so you need more money to buy that more stuff. A change in technology, this is going to be somewhat tricky, but generally speaking, increased technology means that you actually have to hold on to less cash, usually. So, for instance, the ATMs, as they spread throughout the country, made it so you didn't have to have as much cash on you at all times because you could more easily go to an ATM. Debit cards did the same thing. Credit cards did the same thing. Now, as we have mobile payments, you're seeing the same sort of thing occur. People don't need as much money when they're looking at different modes of payment. That makes it easier to carry less cash. Now, there's also one last one, which is kind of a catch-all, and that's change in institutions, which, regulations can really make your money demand go either way. And if that's in a question, it'll be pretty obvious which way it'll go. The equilibrium interest rate is going to be the intersection between your money supply and your money demand. Your money supply in this assumption is going to be a vertical line. It's going to be perfectly inelastic because the money supply is fixed, at least in the short term, and set by the Fed. So, yes, this is a leap. Yes, this is a simplification, but it's going to be helpful when we analyze things. Just know that it doesn't fully capture what is going on. So, as the Fed changes the money supply through monetary policy, so things like open market operations, changes in the reserve requirement, and increased lending, you're going to see the money supply increase. As that occurs, you have a lower nominal interest rate. That means a lower nominal interest rate means that it is now cheaper to borrow. If they decrease the money supply, that is an increase in the nominal interest rate, and that means it's going to be more expensive to borrow. So, why does this matter? Why does monetary policy matter? It matters because the changes in those interest rates changes your investment spending, at least in the short run. So, a decrease in nominal interest rates by increasing our money supply will increase investment spending. That shifts aggregate demand to the right. An increase in nominal interest rates decreases investment spending, which will shift aggregate demand to the left. So this gets us our two different types of policies when it comes to monetary policy. We have expansionary monetary policy, that's going to shift aggregate demand to the right, and contractionary monetary policy, which will shift aggregate demand to the left. Changes in investment can be used to affect the overall economy, and you can look at some of that in terms of trying to stimulate supply side things as well. But if you're thinking in that nature, it should be spelled out for you in the question itself. It should say the decrease in interest rates stimulated capital improvements, capital investments. So what happens in the long run? Well, that is something that in the long run should shift your short run aggregate supply and your long run aggregate supply to the right, along with your aggregate demand. So that is why monetary policy matters. It can really affect all three curves depending on the economic situation at hand.